I think we know quite a good bit about pharmaceuticals in European rivers, in UK rivers. So we came into this with a decent understanding of what we would expect to see. So Glasgow came as the most contaminated river in the UK. And we were slightly surprised by the levels that we saw in Glasgow. I think there were some indications that potentially something like a combined sewage overflow could have contributed to those concentrations. But on the large, we sort of found what we expected in the UK. However, of course, many places of the world, we found surprising results, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's come on to that. But before, I think it was the River Clyde, wasn't it, that you were talking about when you
That's
were
right.
talking about the Glasgow River. I wonder whether we can just go into a bit more detail for people to understand how worried they should be. What can these sorts of chemicals that you found actually do? First of all, to the marine life, or not marine life, the river life that's in there, but then also to us as humans. Can they get into our drinking water, and what can they do to us there?
I think it's very unlikely that pharmaceuticals would be of a harm to humans directly in terms of drinking water or even bathing in the rivers or swimming. What you find is that you would have to consume a vast amount of water in order to come even close to a therapeutic dose of some of the most highly concentrated chemicals we find in the river water, where I think this could potentially affect humans in the long run, particularly with the effects of climate change beginning to show themselves, are endpoints such as antimicrobial resistance. So this is the concept that bacteria become resistant to the effects of the medicines that we use to treat their infections. The likes of the World Health Organization and the United Nations have placed this among the top global health threats to humans at the moment. And the environmental component of this, we're beginning to learn quite a bit more about and to realize that there is a significant aspect of the environment involved in problems like this.
Certainly, and we know that there is this sense that the water that we're drinking is the same water that's been recycled many times over. What should people be doing to try and avoid this? Is this about people flushing drugs or unused pills or whatever down the toilet, or what's happening that's allowing these drugs to get into the river?
Yeah, and I'll just touch on what you've just said. It's actually a very interesting point. I mean, you're right. The water that's on this planet right now that we're drinking in our tea and our coffee right now has been here for as long as the planet has. And what we're doing to it can have effects on the aquatic organisms and indeed us into the future. In terms of what people can do, I think, of course, not flushing drugs down the toilet. You can bring your pharmaceuticals back to pharmacies who can properly dispose of them and avoid them getting into the aquatic environments in the first place. And there are many issues around the proper use of medicines, for example. I mean, in many parts of the world where we've conducted these studies, you can buy antibiotics over the counter with very little or no questions asked. And they can be used to treat ailments that have nothing to do with the effective use of an antibiotic. A viral infection will not be fought at all by an antibiotic, and yet you can buy them in many parts of the world for such causes, and that's done quite frequently. So the proper use of medicine and being cognizant about what your healthcare providers tell you about the proper use of medicine is a very important aspect to consider for every one of us.
Certainly, and I'm really interested, actually, what you're saying there, the public health differences between different countries. Was that reflected in the water? So, for example, countries where modern medicines are not used, did they have fewer of these chemicals, or were there other things getting into their water supplies?
Yeah, we did examine some places where there was very little anthropogenic impact in terms of modern medicine. So, for example, there was a remote village in the tropical rainforest of Venezuela that we didn't find these pharmaceuticals, largely because they aren't used there. So these places are, of course, becoming more and more rare as time goes on. But there are still untouched places in terms of these types of contaminants in the environment.
OK, really good to know. Thank you so much, Dr John Wilkinson there, who
My
led the
pleasure.
study. And the takeaway point from there is do not flush your drugs down the toilet. Give them back to the pharmacy.